I'd buried 3 brothers and a wife by the time I was 40, and I'd have told any man who asked that the Hartleys were a family the Lord had marked for taking. Then one March morning my brother Asa knelt in the snow of Cold Sister Pass with his ear against a half-dead woman's mouth, listening for breath, and I learned I'd been wrong about which way the marking ran. We'd gone up after a heifer. That was all. The thaw had come early and rotten that year, the kind that loosens the high country and sends it down in pieces, and we'd lost a yearling heifer over the rim of the pass and gone up to bring her down or put her out of her misery. Asa rode ahead the way he always did, hunched against the cold like a man carrying a grudge, and I came behind leading the spare horse, and neither of us was talking because by March of that year Asa and I had mostly run out of things to say that weren't about cattle. It was Asa's horse that found her. The animal balked at a long spill of fresh rock below the switchback, planted its feet and would not go on, and Asa cursed it and then went quiet, and then he was off the saddle and down on his knees in the gray slush, pulling stones away with his bare hands. "Eli," he said, "Eli, get down here." There was a horse under the slide, dead, its neck wrong, and pinned half under the horse and half under the rock there was a woman. She'd been thrown clear of the worst of it, I think, or she'd have been killed outright, but a slab the size of a wagon gate had come down across her legs, and the cold had been working on her since some time in the night. Her lips were the color of a bruise. Her braid had come loose and frozen to the rock. She was young, younger than us by 10 years, maybe more, and she was of the sweetgrass people. And when Asa got the last stone off her chest and put his ear to her mouth, I watched my brother's whole face change in a way I had not seen it change in 9 years. "She's breathing," he said. "Eli, she's breathing, get the blanket." I want to tell you I moved fast. I didn't, not at first. I'll be honest with you because I'm too old now to be anything else, and a man who lies to you about the start of a thing can't be trusted to tell you the truth about the end of it. What I did first was stand there with the blanket in my hands and think a string of low, cowardly thoughts. I thought about how far we were from anyone. I thought about Trumbull and what Trumbull would say. I thought, God forgive me, that a dead stranger in a pass was no business of ours, and a living one might be a great deal of business, and the Hartleys had had enough business of the burying kind. Asa looked up at me. His hands were already blue. "The blanket," he said again, and there was something in his voice I hadn't heard since we were boys, something that went straight past my cowardice and put my feet in motion before my head had finished arguing. We dug her out. It took the better part of an hour, and we did it with our hands and a prybar Asa kept under his saddle, and the whole time she didn't wake, only breathed those small, far-apart breaths, and once made a sound deep in her chest like a door swinging on a frozen hinge. Her left leg was broken below the knee. We could both see it. Asa splinted it with 2 pieces of the prybar's handle and the rein off the dead horse, and he did it gently, the way you'd splint a child, and then he wrapped her in both our coats and lifted her against his chest and stood. "We'll take her down to the bench," he said. "Asa," I said it quiet, "we take her down to the bench and the whole valley'll." Then the whole valley'll talk. He was already walking toward his horse. "Get her up to me when I'm mounted. Mind her leg." That was the first day. I lifted a stranger up into my brother's arms on a cold mountain, and the 2 of us rode down out of Cold Sister Pass at a walk, slow as a funeral, only this time we were carrying something living, and I remember thinking that was the strangest funeral I'd ever ridden in. I didn't know yet that we weren't carrying her to her death. I didn't know we were carrying her home. You have to understand about Asa and me to understand the rest, so I'll tell you the shape of it quick, the way he'd have wanted, because Asa hated a long story about himself. Our folks died when I was 6 and Asa was 9. It was the winter of the deep snow, the one the old-timers still talked about when I was grown, and the fever came through the high settlements that year, and took our mother in November and our father in January, and it left 2 boys alone in a soddy on the wrong side of the sweetgrass with not enough wood, and not enough food, and a long white winter still ahead of them. I don't remember most of it. I was 6. I remember being cold in a way that stopped feeling like cold and started feeling like sleep, which is the dangerous part. And I remember Asa crying and then stopping crying. And I remember him feeding the last of the cornmeal into me and not eating any himself. And after that the memory goes white and soft, and I have always been glad it does. What I know, what Asa told me once, years later, drunk, the only time I ever saw him drunk, is that we'd have died. There was no question of it. 2 boys, 9 and 6, a soddy, a killing winter. We'd have been 2 more small graves the spring dug up. Except that we weren't. And the reason we weren't was that a party of the sweetgrass people, moving down out of the high country ahead of the weather, came across our place and found 2 children inside more dead than alive. And instead of riding on, which would have cost them nothing, which no law of theirs or ours required, they stopped. They stopped. A man among them carried us out. Their people were hungry that winter too, everyone was, and they had no surplus of anything, least of all charity to spend on settler children whose own kind had pushed their kind off the sweetgrass flats a generation before, and they fed us anyway. They kept us through the worst of it. When the weather broke, they carried us down to the Lutheran mission at Trumbull and left us there to be raised, and they asked nothing, and they took nothing. And by the time Asa was old enough to want to thank somebody, he didn't know who to thank, because he'd been 9 and starving and half frozen, and the faces had gone white and soft in his memory, the cold had gone white and soft in mine. He carried it, though. I want you to know that. My whole life I thought Asa carried nothing but grief, and I was wrong about that the way I was wrong about so much. He carried a debt. He just didn't know whose name was on it. So when I tell you that my grief-hardened, stone-faced brother knelt in the snow of cold Sister Pass and dug a stranger out of a rockslide with his bare blue hands, you might think it was a soft thing, a kind thing, the kind of thing a good man does. And it was. But it was also a man answering a call he'd been listening for his whole life without knowing it. He just hadn't recognized the voice yet. We got her down to the bench by dark, and that was the start of the talk, and the talk ran ahead of us the way it always does. Bittercrest Bench was our place. The quarter section Asa had proved up and I'd helped him work. A long bench of good grass above the Sweetgrass River with the house and the barn and the spring. And below us in the valley were the other places. The Proots and the Dorseys and old Hannah Coyle, who'd buried 2 husbands and ran her cattle harder than any man. And below them the town of Trumbull. And there was not a soul in any of it who didn't know our business by the second morning. We laid her in the bed that had been our mother's, the one in the back room nobody used, and Asa set her leg properly that first night by lamplight, and I held the lamp and tried not to be sick, because a broken leg set is not a thing a squeamish man should watch. She woke once during it, came up out of the dark all at once, the way hurt people do, and her eyes went straight to Asa's face leaning over her in the lamplight, a strange white man's hand on her broken leg, and I braced for screaming. She didn't scream. She looked at Asa for a long moment, and Asa looked back, and something passed between them I didn't have a name for then, and then she said something in her own tongue, low, 3 or 4 words, and Asa shook his head to show he didn't understand, and she closed her eyes and let him finish the splint. She judged him in that one look, judged him the way you judge a horse you've just been thrown by, fast and complete, and she decided he wasn't going to hurt her, and she'd gone back under. I thought about that look for a long time afterward. She'd been the one doing the deciding. Lying broken in a stranger's bed in a stranger's valley, she'd looked my brother over and decided whether to trust him, and only then had she let go. That was Wren. Start to finish. She never once in all the years I knew her let a thing be done to her that she had not first decided to allow. The fever came on the 3rd day, the way it does with a bad break, and for a week she was somewhere we couldn't reach. Asa wouldn't leave her. I ran the place alone that week, which wasn't much running because it was March and the work was light, and I'd come in at night and find him sitting in the hard chair by the bed where he'd sat all day, spooning broth between her cracked lips a little at a time, talking to her low and steady the way you talk to a sick animal. Words that didn't matter, just the sound of them. A thing to hold to in the dark. "You're going to want to stop that," I told him one night. "Stop what?" "Whatever this is, before it gets to be something." I sat down across from him. "Asa, you know what they're saying in town." "I know what they're saying. Dorsey says we ought to send word to the agency. Says she's their lookout, not ours. Says Dorsey can come up here and say it to me." Assad didn't look up from the broth. "He won't, though. None of them will." He wiped her chin with his thumb, gentle. "It's easy to know what a man ought to do with a dying stranger when the stranger's dying in somebody else's house." I didn't have an answer to that. I've thought of 100 answers since, sitting on porches all the years after, and none of them is better than the silence I gave him. The fever broke on the 8th day. I know because I was there for it. Asa had finally let me take a turn so he could sleep an hour, and I was in the hard chair half dozing when I heard her say, clear and quiet in English, "You have honey." I about came out of my skin. "Ma'am." "Honey?" She was looking at me lucid, her eyes clear for the first time. She was very weak and very calm. "For the fever and the dream sickness. Honey in warm water and the inner bark of the willow if you have it pounded. I will tell you which willow." A pause. "Where is the other one?" "The Asa, my brother, he's asleep. He's been," I stopped. "He's been sitting with you a week." She took that in. Something moved behind her face. "I know," she said. "I heard him." And then she slept again, real sleep this time, the healing kind, and I went and woke Asa to tell him, and I'll never forget his face when I said she's awake and she's asking after you. He didn't smile. Asa hardly ever smiled in those years. But the thing that grief does to a face, the way it pulls everything down and holds it for 1 second that let go. And I saw my brother the way he must have looked before the world started taking things from him. And then it was gone. And he was up and moving toward the back room, and I was alone in the kitchen feeling like I'd seen something I wasn't meant to. She told us her name was Wren, or near enough. The name her people called her meant a small brown bird that sings before the dawn light comes, and the nearest English to it was Wren. So Wren is what we called her, and what she let us call her, which is not the same thing, and I knew the difference even then. She'd been coming down out of the high country alone, she said, which surprised me. A young woman alone in that country in the rotten thaw. And when I said as much, she gave me a look that I came to know well. A look that said I had asked a foolish question out of foolish notions about what a woman could and couldn't do. And she said she had been alone in higher and harder country than Cold Sister and come down fine. And it was the rockslide that beat her, not the country, and the rockslide would have beaten anyone. She'd been bringing word between her people's winter camp and a band of them wintering apart, carrying something, a message, a decision. I never fully understood the shape of her people's doings, and she never fully explained them, which was her right. She kept her own counsel. That was the first thing the valley couldn't abide about her, and the last thing I came to love. She mended slow because the break was bad, but she mended herself as much as we mended her. She had us bring her things, willow bark and certain roots, and a moss that grew on the north faces, and she made her own medicines and dressed her own leg once she could sit up, and she was a better hand at it than the doctor in Trumbull who'd never have come up the bench anyway. By the time the leg would bear weight, she'd remade that back room into a kind of dispensary, and Hannah Coyle, of all people, was the first of the valley to find that out. Hannah Coyle came up the bench in May to tell Asa to his face that he was a fool and a scandal, which was the kind of errand Hannah enjoyed. She was 60 and built like a fence post and afraid of exactly nothing. She came up the bench and she met Wren on the porch. Wren was up on a crutch Asa had made her by then, out taking the air, and Hannah opened her mouth to start in, and Wren looked at the way Hannah was standing, favoring her right hip the way she'd favored it for 2 years since a horse rolled on her, and Wren said, before Hannah had got a word out, "Your hip. It wakes you in the night. It is worse when the weather turns." Hannah Coyle shut her mouth. "How do you know that?" Because you stand on it the way a person stands on a thing that has been broken and set wrong. Wren came down off the crutch onto the rail easy. I can show you a thing to do for it. It will not cure it. Nothing will cure it. It was set wrong and it is years healed. But you will sleep. She looked at Hannah levelly. If you want it. I am not in the business of forcing my medicine on people who came up a mountain to be angry. Hannah Coyle stayed 2 hours. She went home with her hip wrapped away. Wren showed her and a pouch of something to steep, and she came back the next week. And the week after she brought Mrs. Prout and the Prout baby that wouldn't stop colicking. And by midsummer there was a path worn up the bench from the valley road, and it didn't lead to a sow or to me. It led to Wren. The same valley that had said turn her over to the agency was sending its sick children up the bench, and not one of them ever said a word about the contradiction, because that is how people are, and Wren never made them say it, because that was how Wren was. She took their fear of her and their need of her both, and she set the one against the other the way you'd set a bone, slow and steady, and she let time do the rest. I asked her once why she bothered. They'd have left her in the pass, half of them, I said. Why mend their bobbies? She was quiet a while. Then she said, when I was small there was a winter my people fed 2 settler children who would have died, children of the men who had pushed us off the flats. She was grinding something in a stone bowl as she said it, not looking at me. My grandfather said a thing then that I did not understand until I was grown. He said, we do not feed the children because the fathers deserve it. We feed the children because we are the kind of people who feed children. He said the day we let what was done to us decide what we do, they have taken the last thing, and it is the only thing that was ever truly ours. She tapped the pestle clean against the bowl's rim. So, I mend the bobbies, because I am the kind of person who mends bobbies. It is the only thing that is truly mine. I want you to mark that, because at the time it landed on me as just a fine thing finely said, the sort of thing you nod at. I didn't hear what was inside it. I didn't hear 2 settler children who would have died. I'd stopped, by then, telling that story even to myself. The white and soft place in my memory had grown over the door to that room entire, and I walked past it every day of that summer and didn't knock. Asa was starting to hear something. He changed that summer, my brother, and the valley saw it before I did because the valley watched him the way you watch weather. It wasn't that he laughed. Asa Hartley did not learn to laugh that summer or any other. I think he'd had it taken out of him too young for it to grow back. It was smaller and stranger than that. It was that he started to be in the world again. For 9 years since his wife and the child died, I haven't told you that yet. And I'll tell you quick because it's the wound under everything. Asa married a Trumbull girl named Ada the year I turned 20, and she died in childbed 2 years on, the baby with her, and Asa put them in one grave up under the cottonwood at the top of the bench, and after that he was a man made of stone and work, and I lost him as surely as I'd lost the others, only he kept breathing, which is its own kind of cruelty to watch. For 9 years Asa had moved through the days like a man doing time. And that summer he started, here and there in small ways, to do something other than time. He fixed the porch step that had been broken since before Ada died. He started bringing things up from town that weren't necessary, a paper of needles once, because he'd seen Wren mending and noticed hers were poor. He took to lingering over the evening work in a way that brought him past the back room window. He talked more, which from Asa meant he sometimes said a whole sentence unprompted. And he watched Wren, not the way the valley feared, not a hungry watching, but the way a man watches a fire he's afraid to get too near and can't make himself leave. Wren watched him back. I'd see it. She'd be grinding her medicines or splitting her willow, and Asa would cross the yard, and her hands would keep working but her eyes would go to him and stay a beat too long, and then come back. They were 2 people who'd both decided long ago that they were done being known by anyone, and they were each watching the other be the exact same kind of alone, and there is nothing in this world lonelier or more dangerous than recognizing your own grief walking around in somebody else's body. It was September before either of them did anything about it, and what broke it loose was the cottonwood grave. She'd seen it, of course. You couldn't be on the bench and not see the two-headed grave under the cottonwood, the one with the small marker beside the larger. She'd never asked. That was Wren. She'd no more pry into a man's grief than she'd let him pry into hers. But that September evening I came up from the lower pasture, and I saw the two of them standing up under the cottonwood in the long gold light, Asa and Wren, and Asa was talking, and his hat was in his hands. I didn't go up. I'm not a complete fool. I stood at the rail and I watched my brother stand at his wife's grave and tell a thing to a woman of the sweetgrass people that I would have bet the whole quarter section he'd never tell a living soul. And when he was done, she didn't touch him, and she didn't say the soft, useless things people say. She stood beside him and looked at the grave with him, and after a while she said something, and he answered, and they stood there together until the light went, two people keeping company with the dead. And when they came down off the rise it was full dark and neither of them said a word to me and I didn't ask. That night Asa came and sat across from me at the kitchen table where I was working a strap of harness, and he said, with no lead-up, the way he said everything, "I'm going to ask her to stay." I set the strap down. "Asa, I know what you're going to say." "I don't think you do because I don't know what I'm going to say." I rubbed my face. "Stay how? Stay as what?" "As my wife, if she'll have it." He said it plain, but his hands were flat on the table and pressing down, the way a man presses down on something to keep it from shaking. "I haven't asked her yet. I wanted to, I don't know what I wanted. I wanted to say it out loud once before I said it to her, so I'd know if it sounded like a madman saying it. And it sounds like a madman saying it." He almost smiled. "Almost. I'm going to ask her anyway. I want to tell you I gave him good counsel. The truth is I gave him scared counsel, the same cowardly arithmetic I'd done in the past, what the valley would say, what the law might do, whether a marriage like that could even hold in that country in those years, whether he was reaching for her or just reaching for anything that wasn't the grave. I said all of it. Asa let me say all of it. And when I'd run down he said, quiet. "Eli, when we were boys, the winter Ma and Pa died." He looked at me, and there was something working in his face, something coming up out of the white and soft dark that I'd walled over so long ago. "Do you remember who got us out?" "No," I said. "I was 6. I don't remember any of it, you know I don't. I've been trying to remember for 30 years. I couldn't. It was all gone, just gone like it happened to some other boy." He spread his hands on the table. "But Eli, the last few months, things have been coming back, little things, the smell of the smoke in the lodge they kept us in, a song somebody sang, a man's hands, big hands, a scar across the back of one feeding me the way I fed." He stopped, started again. "The way I've watched Wren feed the Prout baby. Things I never could get back, they've been coming back since she's been here. And I can't make sense of why except—" He didn't finish it. He couldn't. He didn't have the last piece yet, and neither did I, and we sat there in the lamplight, two grown men circling a door in the dark that neither of us would knock on, and outside in the September cold Wren was in the back room grinding her medicines, the daughter of the man with the scarred hands, and none of us knew it yet. He asked her the next morning. She said she would think on it, which from Wren was not a no. Wren never said a thing she didn't mean, and never said yes to anything she hadn't first turned over alone, and she went up into the high country for 9 days to do her thinking. On a horse Asa gave her free and clear, no strings, which was the only way she'd have taken it. And those 9 days were the longest of my brother's life, and I think the longest of mine watching him live them. And when she came back down off Cold Sister on the 10th morning, Asa was at the foot of the bench waiting like he'd been there all 9 days, and she rode up to him and stopped, and looked down at him a long moment, the way she'd looked at him that first night by the lamp, deciding. "Yes," she said, "but you will hear my conditions and you will hear my people, and I will not be a thing this valley tells stories about. I am not a story. I am a person who has chosen, and you will let me be seen to have chosen, or I will not do it." "Yes," Asa said, "all of it, yes." "Then yes," said Wren. That was the autumn. They were married before the snow, in a way that satisfied her and a way that satisfied the Lutheran minister both, which took some doing. And Hannah Coyle stood up for Wren because by then Hannah would have fought the whole valley for her, and the valley came, not all of it, and not all of it kindly, but it came, which in that country in those years was more than I'd have believed in the spring. And I thought, fool that I was, that the story was over. I thought we'd come to the warm part where the fire is built, and the door is shut against the cold. I didn't know the door I kept walking past was about to come open on its own. It came open at the spring flood the next year, which is where this story always meant to end, and where the thing I'd carried since I was 6 finally caught up with me. That spring the thaw came hard and fast and all at once, the worst anyone could remember, worse than the rotten thaw that had buried Wren in the pass. The sweetgrass came up out of its banks in a single night and kept coming, and the low places flooded, and the valley road went under, and the families in the bottoms, the Pruits worst of all, lowest of all, were caught between the river and the cutbank with the water rising and no road out. We knew it because Wren knew it. She read the weather the way the rest of us read print, and 2 days ahead she'd been uneasy, and the morning the river broke she had a sign me up before light and moving. The bottoms will flood, she said. The Pruits, the Dorseys, they will wait too long because they always wait too long, and the road will be gone before they move. She was already pulling on her coat. We go now. We went, the 3 of us in the gray dawn, down off the bench with ropes and the strongest horses, into water that was already higher than it had any right to be. And it was as bad as she'd said. Worse. The Prout place was an island by the time we reached it, the water brown and fast and full of broken things, and the family was up on the roof of the soddy. Prout, his wife, the 3 children, the baby Wren had pulled through the colic the summer before, and the soddy was washing out from under them even as we came up, the mud walls dissolving in the flood. I won't give you the whole of it. It was a long, cold, terrible morning, and I've left most of it on the riverbank where it belongs. What I'll tell you is the shape of it, that we got ropes across, and that the water rose faster than any of us could work, and that there came a moment, there's always the one moment, when the soddy gave way for good and went into the river, and the youngest Prout boy, 6 years old, the age I'd been that winter, went into the brown water with it. And my brother Asa went in after him. I screamed his name. I had hold of the rope on our side, and I couldn't let go of it without losing Prout and his wife both, and I screamed Asa's name and watched my last brother go into the flood after a stranger's child, and I thought, with a calm that frightens me to this day, so this is how the marking finishes us. This is the last grave. And I'll dig it alone. But Wren was already moving. She'd been working the far rope, and when Asa went in she did not scream and she did not freeze. She read the river. I watched her read it, watched her eyes go down the current to the bend where the flood piled against the cutbank, and through everything it carried back toward the near shore. And she put her horse into the water at the one place a horse could stand, and rode it out to the edge of the deep, calm as a woman crossing a creek. And she was there at the bend when the river brought my brother and the Prout boy around, and she got a loop over Asa's arm on the first throw, the only throw there was time for. And she took a turn around her saddle horn and her horse dug in, and she held them. She held them both against the whole weight of that river. A young woman and a good horse against the spring flood, and she held, and I got the Prouts to the bank and came down the rope hand over hand, and we hauled them in, Asa and the boy, blue and choking and alive, both of them alive, onto the mud of the high ground while the river took everything else. The whole valley was there by then. They'd come from the high places when the water rose, the way people do, useless and watching, and they'd watched the end of it from the bank, watched Asa go in, watched Wren ride into the flood and hold a man and a child out of the jaws of it. And when we dragged them up onto the mud, there was a sound from the people on the bank that I'd never heard the valley make. They cheered. The same valley. They cheered her, and some of them were crying, and Hannah Coyle was down in the mud with us, pounding the water out of the Prout boy and cursing and praying in the same breath, and Mrs. Prout was on her knees with her saved children around her, and it was over, and we were all of us alive. And I sat back in the cold mud and started to laugh and couldn't stop. The way you do. The bad laughing that's the other side of the worst grief. And that was when Prout's old father, old Amos Prout, who'd come west 40 years before the town, before any of us, a man so old he was more memory than man. That was when old Amos Prout, looking at Wren where she sat in the mud holding her exhausted horse's head against her chest, said the thing that opened the door at last. "I know that horse sense," he said. His voice was thin as paper. "I know that way of reading water. I seen it once before, long time back." He was looking at Wren and not seeing her, seeing back through 40 years. "There was a man of the sweetgrass people pulled my own self out of the sweetgrass when it was up like this, year of the deep snow. Big man. Had a scar across the back of his hand here." He drew a line across his own old hand, from a knife or a claw I never knew. Two Hawks, they called him. He read the water just exactly like that, just exactly, I never forgot it. He shook his old head. "Wonder whatever become of Two Hawks." I felt a sago still beside me. Soaked, half drowned, shaking with cold, my brother went absolutely still, and I knew without looking that the door had come open, because it had come open in me too, all at once. The white and soft dark blown clean away as if it had never been. A man's hands feeding me, big hands, a scar across the back of one. Asa turned to Wren. He could barely talk for the cold and the water in him, but he got it out. "Your father," he said. "Wren, your father. What was," his voice broke, "what was your father's name?" And Wren, who had never once told us her people's business, who kept her own counsel to the last, Wren looked at my brother for a long moment, and then she looked at the scar she could not see on a hand long dead, and something passed over her face that I think had been coming a long time, longer than any of us knew, because Wren read more than weather, and I have wondered ever since how long she had known and waited for us to come to it ourselves. "Two Hawks," she said. "My father was Two Hawks. He died 4 winters ago." She held Asa's eyes. "He told a story when I was small, of a winter when his people were hungry, and they came down out of the high country and found 2 settler children alone in a soddy on the wrong side of the sweetgrass, more dead than alive. The children of men who had pushed his people off the flats." Her voice was very steady and very quiet, and the whole muddy bank had gone silent to hear it, the rescued and the rescuers and the watching valley all gone silent. "His people said, 'Ride on. They are not ours. Their fathers are not ours.' And my father said, 'We do not save the children because the fathers deserve it. We save the children because we are the kind of people who save children.' And he carried them out. 2 boys, 9 and 6. Her eyes had not left Asa's face. "He never knew what became of them. He wondered all his life. He used to say he hoped the winter had been kind to them. He used to say it on the cold nights." She breathed. "I think it was not always kind. But I think, looking at you, I think it was not wholly cruel either." Nobody on that bank said anything. The river roared on past, carrying off the year's wreckage. And my brother Asa, who I had watched bury everyone he loved and turned to stone, who had not wept at Ada's grave or our parents' or any grave in 9 hard years, put his face in his ruined hands there in the mud, and wept like the child he had been. The 9-year-old who had fed the last of the cornmeal to his little brother and not known, would never have dared to hope that someone was coming down out of the high country to carry him to the spring. I went and put my arm around him. I was weeping too, and Wren came and knelt in the mud with the 2 of us, the daughter of the man who had saved us, who had ridden into the flood that same morning to save my brother as her father had once saved him, and the 3 of us knelt there together while the whole valley watched. And old Amos Prout took off his hat, and one by one, the way it happens, the men on the bank took off their hats too. She'd known. I'm near certain of it. Not from the start, but somewhere in that first summer, I think, when Asa's memories began coming up like spring water, and he'd say things to her in the evenings. A man's scarred hands, a song he half remembered, the smell of smoke in a lodge. Somewhere in there Wren had heard her father's story walking around in my brother's broken memory, and she had said nothing. I asked her once, years on, why she'd waited, why she hadn't told us the morning she put it together. She was old by then, and so was I, and Asa was up under the cottonwood where we'd laid him beside Ada and the child, his own marker beside theirs. An old, old man when he finally went, which I count the great mercy of my life, that the marking I'd been so sure of let him grow old, let him have 30 years of evenings he'd never have dared hope for, in a house full of children that weren't dead, the Sweetgrass Valley's children and his own with Wren both. Why did I wait? She turned it over the way she turned everything over, because it was not my story to give you. It was your father's gift and your brother's debt, and a debt a man does not know he carries. When it comes back to him, he has to recognize it himself, or it is only a thing he was told. If I had said it that first summer, you would have believed me, and you would have been grateful, and it would have been a kindness done to you. She looked out at the high country, at Cold Sister Pass gone blue with distance. But Asa needed to remember it, not be told it. He needed to come down to it on his own, the way you come down a mountain slow, so that when he reached the bottom he knew the whole road and not just the end of it. My grandfather used to say a gift you are told about is a gift you owe. A gift you remember is a gift you own. She smiled, which she did more than Asa ever had. I wanted him to own it. He had owned so little, your brother. He had let so much be taken. I wanted him to have one whole thing that no one could take, because he had walked the whole road to it himself. I think about that more than I think about almost anything, now that I'm the last one and there's mostly thinking left to do. My brother dug a stranger out of the snow with his bare hands because he was the kind of man who saves people. And he was the kind of man who saves people because 30 years before, a man named Two Hawks had been the kind of man who saves children, and had decided that what was done to him would not decide what he did. The kindness had gone down into the ground of us when we were too young to know it, and it had come up again in its own time, the way a thing planted comes up, and it had carried us all out of the cold a second time. We do not save the children because the fathers deserve it. We save the children because we are the kind of people who save children. Two Hawks said it to his daughter, and his daughter said it to me on a riverbank with the flood going by, and I have said it to my own children and theirs, and that is the only thing I have ever had to leave them that I am sure is worth the leaving. I'd buried 3 brothers and a wife by the time I was 40, and I told myself the Hartleys were marked for taking. I was wrong. We were marked for keeping. We just hadn't met the hand that meant to keep us yet, a young woman half frozen in a high pass, the daughter of a man with a scar across the back of his hand, come down out of the high country one more time, the way her people had come down once before, to carry 2 cold brothers home. Asa knelt in the snow that morning and listened for her breath. I have come to believe he was listening for it his whole life.